Alright, here's problem number 17. It says 2 times the cosine squared of x minus cosine of x minus 1 equals 0. When we look at this, we're like, hey, this doesn't have something times something equals 0. So what is this? Just treat this, okay, like as if it were, let's say, 2n squared minus an n minus a 1 is 0. How would you factor this? How would you do this? Well, it breaks down into two binomials. Like, oh, well, that's got to be a 2n and an n. And what's the only thing to produce a 1? A 1 and a 1. That's easy enough. Now, since it's a subtraction here, one of these has to be minus and one has to be plus. Well, this center part will give us 1n. Outer part will be 2n. We want to lose an n so that we know the subtractions here, so that we have minus 2n, and then when we do the inners, plus 1n. That's what it would be. This is treated the same way. Just treat the cosine like it's an n, because it's 2 times something squared minus that value, that's something, minus 1 is 0. So, or you could just replace this n with the word cosine, because that's all I'm really doing. So it's 2 cosine of x plus 1 times the cosine of x minus 1 equals 0. Notice 2 cosine of x times cosine of x gives you 2 cosine squared. When I do the inner, I'm going to have 1 cosine of x. The outer will be minus 2 cosine of x, which will be a minus cosine of x. And then positive 1 times the negative 1, minus 1. That's how we do it. So now we set each of these pieces equal to 0. So I take 2 cosine of x plus 1 set equal to 0, and cosine of x minus 1 equal to 0. Add your 1, you're going to get, hey, when is the cosine of x a positive 1? When I subtract 1 here from both sides, 2 cosine of x equals negative 1, divide by 2. Hey, when is the cosine of x? Negative a half. Let's deal with this first. Cosine of x is your first value. When do you come over? 1 and up 0? The very beginning, 0 degrees and 360. Again, the directions say this is what we're using right here. This is the domain. It says start right after 0. Don't include 0, but include 360. So, right here, that's when x is 360 degrees. That's when you end up getting at 1. Here, when's the cosine of x? Negative a half. Cosine of x is your second value. So when have you moved over negative a half? You moved over here to negative a half right when you've gone to that point and this point. Well, we know there's 90 right here. 30 more degrees, we recognize that as 120. Here, remember you're 270. What's 30 degrees away from there? 240. So 120 and 240 is when you end up having a cosine value of negative a half. So that, and that are what you would put down for your answers to solve this equation.